and welcome once again to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I'm your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And this week, we watched Coco. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys right up front. I don't understand the appeal of this movie. I went into it, everyone's been talking about just how stellar this movie absolutely is and how it's such a great movie. It's incredible for kids, adults, etc., etc. And I watched it for a little bit, and then they brought the snowman in, and I was just kind of done. So I had to have watched this stupid snowman move around for 2 hours, right? That's how long that snowman was doing whatever the fuck that snowman was doing. So after that, I just left. I figured that was all there was to it.
Well, you missed the most brutal death in Coco then, when the snowman drank the hot chocolate and it went through his body like acid and came pouring out of his skull.
Okay, yeah, I did see that. That was pretty rough, and I think we should really touch on that one a little bit because it did feel a little out of tone for a children's movie, honestly. There was just some oddities to it, I think is a good way of putting it. And I understand that they were trying to go for a happy tone or whatever, but the pacing was really slow. Each scene had to have been 5 to 10 minutes long, and I think it was just one continuous shot. It was weird.
Oh, and the music was just hideous. I know that these Disney movies have to have songs, but usually they put, a little bit of effort. They want, little kids to be singing and annoying their parents with them, but, God, it just felt like people talking and, auto-tuned to, a piano track. It was awful.
Plus, the animation of the whole thing was just, it felt like somebody had already made a movie, and they just kind of took the silhouettes of the people and made them move in a very jerky way. This almost felt like it should have been a short for a different movie, but it went on for it had to have been 2 hours. So there's no way this was a short, right? We watched Coco and it was this stupid fucking movie, right? This is what this was. No, legitimately, folks, if you go see this movie, wait 20 minutes and just don't go watch the Frozen short in front of it. It's really bad.
Yeah, it's bad. The person who sold me my ticket actually warned me about it.
Yeah, there was no joy to be had from that. All joking aside, those were all legitimate criticisms of this short. It's not very good.
When you think of a Disney Pixar short at the beginning, you usually think of some cutesy little love story starring an inanimate object or from a different perspective. There was a Paperboy.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, that's a good one. There's the one starring the dog, the relationship and the perspective of the little doggo. That's cute. And then even before, when you're just kind of goofing around, that one at the beginning of Finding Nemo with the really big bird that's annoying. I think that's the beginning of Finding Nemo. Yeah, there's this cute little stuff like that. The shorts are usually a delight.
And short.
And short is the key word. It's literally dragged out. Watching Olaf's Bizarre Adventure, I felt like I aged 20 years.
It was rough. But now that we've probably made you guys age 20 years with this bizarre entrance that took way longer than either of us intended it to.
Well, it's appropriate for the subject matter, I think.
No, it is. We're very big into symbolism here. So if we ever seem like we're ranting or just getting really off topic, it's because the movie did at one point or another. So we're trying. It's allegorical, honestly. This is a very meta podcast.
It's allegorical, honestly. Okay, so Coco.
Yes, Coco, the actual movie was a genuine delight. It was very, very good. It was very emotional. The characters were all lovely. The animation was stellar. Everything about it was great. You should go watch it, but wait 20 minutes longer than you think you should.
Yeah, totally agreed. I'm pretty much in agreement with MovieBob on this one. He did a short review where basically he said that this movie did everything it set out to do pretty much perfectly. It didn't necessarily like break a ton of new ground with like the plot, but the characters are delightful. The story was great. Art design, production design, wonderful. The like cultural focus on the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, that felt like a really like fresh approach to what was, kind of, in many ways just, I don't want to say just, but in many ways your Pixar plot, your adventure into another world of some sort, where, we'll learn things along the way. But it felt like a very fresh take on that plot, and just everything it wanted to do with its themes, with its characters. It wasn't always surprising, but it was, as you say, a genuine delight. And, even though I think that as far as Pixar goes, I feel like the general opinion right about now is that they're in kind of a decline, or have been in kind of a decline, like, ever since, like, depending on where you want to put it, like, some people say since, like, WALL-E, some people say since, like, Up or Toy Story 3, that all the other ones have just been, like, a bunch of sequels and haven't been as good. And, I think...
talking about Cars 3 was the best movie I've ever seen.
Cars 3, I can't say that I ever watched Cars 2 or 3. But as far as, like, the other sequels, as far as, the other movies, I think the badness has been a little overstated. I like Monsters University. Even the Good Dinosaur, like, narratively, that movie wasn't really anything. But, like, visually, that was, like, a super beautiful looking movie. So even that wasn't, like, a total wash. Regardless, even though I think that the case has been overstated, I think that Coco is easily the best movie they've made since Up.
A return to form, if you will.
Yeah, a bit of a return to form, because Inside Out was pretty good too, but that was a little less. This one's a lot more, and I'd say that this is true about Up as well, in that, like, both Up and Inside Out, like, could be emotional at times, but they were often, it was more just, like, in parts. Like, that's kind of the conventional wisdom about Up, is that, the 20 minutes are fantastic. The first 20 minutes are a fantastic, really emotional little short film, and then the rest of the movie is just, again, kind of bog standard, like, adventure narrative kids movie. Inside Out, it's got some emotional moments, but thematically, not really that deep, and not really that interesting thematically. Whereas this movie does a much better job of weaving in those emotional moments and kind of this focus on theme in a way that feels a lot more natural, like, just with the subject matter, just with this, like, world of the dead, and how that relates to familial expectations, how events that occurred, like, long before you were born, like, people who you never met, can still have a big impact on your life. And it just had a really solid, like, emotional and thematic core to it that I think, we haven't really seen, in a long time from Pixar. And because, there's usually, like, a good, the execution is usually pretty quality, but, like, this feels like it's going to resonate a lot more with people than something like, say, like Finding Dory did, which I also thought was fun, but wasn't, again, kind of a disposable, like, fun sequel at best.
I would like to say that we will not really be talking very much in this episode about the actual theme of Dia de los Muertos or the cultural impact of the Mexican culture and everything like that, because we are two white dudes and don't know shit about it, so we're not gonna pretend like we do. I'm gonna have a couple articles in the description if you're looking for more information along those lines on how it handled the cultural sensitivity and death. We don't have that cultural point of view. I don't want to step on any toes. We're gonna keep this purely thematic. So
Yeah, just focus on what's in the text of the movie, because as far as doing like that sort of like cultural analysis, you could do a lot better than someone who took like high school Spanish and like there was a paragraph about it in like the textbook, and that's like the extent. So
I went to Mexico once on a cruise, which is about the whitest thing you can do.
Oh Lord. So yeah, we'll leave that to our betters. Just kind of keep this focused on like characterization and stuff.
Then with all of that out of the way, let's dive right into it and let's start talking about spoilers. We're going to go back to our old trends and start from the beginning, because somebody dies really early on, and it is one of the best deaths I have ever seen in a movie. Not really from a thematic standpoint, but just because it was absolutely hilarious. And that was morbid.
But it is really hilarious, so you're justified because he turns out to be an asshole.
Right, of course. So we have the famous musician Ernesto de la Cruz, who we're introduced to in the beginning as an individual who had a family and then leaves his family behind to go pursue a career in music. And this is all done through very interesting tissue paper artwork. There's an actual name for it. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I apologize. But it eventually transitions to actual animation. And it's during one of his famous songs. And as he is singing this song, he starts to walk up the stairway to a giant bell that's hanging above him. And when he reaches the top, I think apropos of nothing, the line holding the bell snaps and crushes him. And that's it.
It's really funny and really glib. Like, you don't feel bad about laughing, like, just from the way the scene is shot, and, like, kind of going into this movie knowing that it's about death, I feel like kind of primes you for it. And also the fact that this is all clearly backstory. Like, this isn't the kind of Disney death. Like, this isn't Mufasa. This isn't like the important like parent getting killed that will serve to like traumatize a generation of children. No, this is just to set everything up to establish that our protagonist Miguel really looks up to De La Cruz, just kind of go over his whole life and cement his legacy in like a funny way. Like, make it so we're not too sad that this guy is dead and we can focus on more important things. I think the bell is just about perfect. And it's really satisfying when it comes back later on. He the twist, of course, is that, we're deep into spoiler territory anyway. He turns out to be our villain. And so at the end of the movie, nice little callback when he gets launched by I believe it's by the giant spirit guide kitty that like bats him away. And then he gets crushed by another bell, and it's great. It's a nice fitting little end to a scumbag.
I think part of it too is, and this is just from a standpoint of how humanity perceives death, is that it's so quick and so jarring that, like, you're cognitively aware that this individual just died, but you don't know how to process it other than to laugh. Which I think is kind of interesting. I think there's an expectation that that's how we will process it. It's how it introduces and allows a character to die early on without creating a very dour tone for the rest of the movie, despite the whole movie prominently featuring the themes of death. This knowledge that when a person just dead, we're gonna react in a certain way, and knowing that more than likely we'll probably laugh at it because humans are stupid and we don't know how to react in situations like that, is a brilliant use of filmmaking. Essentially, it's planning for your audience and knowing that this is not going to create the wrong mood for the rest of the movie.
It's something that the movie even kind of points out when the other people in the I forget what it's called, but the area where all the forgotten people are who have no relatives that remember them. When Hector is getting kind of heckled by these guys and they're talking about how he died in a really embarrassing way. Like, I feel like that's something the movie kind of knows, is that sometimes, as terrible as it is, death can be funny. Maybe not in real life, but in movies, certainly.
There's a dark humor that we all have. It's, hospital humor to some people. It's just a general darkness to others. You got to find humor in some terrible, terrible things every now and again just to kind of make it through life. And this movie plays off that really, really well.
Speaking of De La Cruz, there was one element that I was really worried about early on, because even though we start off, we don't know that De La Cruz is Miguel's ancestor at first. And that doesn't end up being true, but we're led to believe that, and then of course Miguel finds evidence that he is related to him. And so we get that, and we get the opening scenes of Miguel hiding to play his music and going out into the town square and shining the shoes of the guy, gives him the guitar, and his grandma comes and smashes it, and we get a good picture of the way that this family is shunning his passion, the thing that he really loves, and it really sets the movie up very obviously to be another bad father figure story. I was thinking a lot about Guardians of the Galaxy 2 kind of early on, because that's kind of what I was worried about this movie being, because that we're gonna just have a movie. He's gonna go to the land of the dead, he's gonna meet De La Cruz, and then De La Cruz is gonna turn out to be bad, and he's gonna be sad, and he should have listened to his family. He should have listened to his music-hating grandma all along, and family's the most important thing, and how dare you go and follow your dreams. And that's sort of what I was worried about this movie becoming. And to some extent, it is kind of a Guardians 2 thing. That does happen. He does go meet De La Cruz, and obviously it doesn't pan out. There's a little twist that I thought was a nice little touch, that Hector is actually his ancestor, the skeleton he's been traveling with, who's been serving kind of as a comic relief of sorts. And so when we get to De La Cruz and we find out what his transgression is obviously, it helps that we don't spend the whole movie just on this relationship. We just get a few scenes of them clowning around and having fun, and then Miguel wants to go back to the world loving. He needs to get De La Cruz's blessing, because his great-great-grandma Imelda won't give it to him if he keeps trying to play music, because his family hates music. So we find out what that transgression is, and it's that De La Cruz murdered Hector and stole all of his music. And the first thing that I thought is that I think before, if I had seen this movie even a year ago, maybe, even a couple months ago, I would have maybe thought that this was too over the top. That, okay, the plagiarism, that's one thing, and I know that this is a kid's movie, but, having the celebrity, murder him for his success feels a little bit too much to me. But considering that we are starting to see, or have seen now, many bad men in Hollywood who have done many, many bad things, to have our big celebrity, finger quotes, father figure, turn out to be, completely evil like that, actually really resonates in a way. So, not good. It's not good that resonates, but, the movie feels true. The movie feels true in that regard. I think that's just one of the strengths of this movie overall, is the way that it handles its themes of death, the way that it handles its themes in general, never feel, too over the top or too simplified for a kid's movie. Obviously it is a kid's movie and there are some simplifications, but there are just a lot of little layers to it. All the little layers and wrinkles mean that when the movie wants to try and hit you with that big emotional moment, and it does a couple times, this is a movie about death. It doesn't want to shy away from that stuff. So even when it starts heading in a direction that, maybe you saw coming, or maybe feels like the predictable route to go, just felt natural for the screenwriting, the fact that it all feels true and grounded in some sort of emotional reality means that those moments are able to hit big.
In line with little wrinkles and big emotional moments, the one thing that really stood out to this movie is kind of a flip on its head of the standard Pixar Disney villain. Is you generally really get emotional because you are afraid of the death of your hero. You don't want so-and-so to be killed by X and Y because that's, bad for the movie. But in this, you're actually worried about Miguel becoming alive again, because the whole movie takes place in this dead city. And the villain of the first chunk is his ancestor, Imelda, who's constantly trying to give him her blessing so that he will live again and be able to be free of the Skellyman City. So he constantly spends the entire time running from not death, but life, at least in the literal sense. Because this whole time that he is running from her blessing, he is running from her insistence on his return to reality, he is also fleeing from the condition that he would have to give up music, the one thing that gives him true life. He would be forsaking that to make shoes, something that he clearly despises and would view as a fate worse than death, and is shown to view that as a fate worse than death by literally running from life. He would prefer to risk staying dead to get a blessing that would allow him to live his life as he sees fit than to live and metaphorically die through living a life that he does not like.
Yeah, it just really shows that this movie was careful about its themes, careful about its messaging, because there are a lot of kids' movies that would have taken a stance one way or another, that either be like De La Cruz and go follow your dreams, or grandma knows best, go home, family's the most important thing. And both of those are kind of shitty morals. I am more inclined, as a person, to buy into follow your dreams moral. But even that, there's the movie makes it obvious, De La Cruz's obvious badness, shows what's wrong with that sort of sentiment. That whole, looking out for number one, claw your way to the top. It's a good reminder. But I think what is maybe less considered, especially when you're looking at a mainstream kids movie and is therefore, kind of sanitized, is that telling, especially kids, and that's the other thing, is that the movies that you watch as a kid leave an impression on you. And if you're being told that your family is the most important thing and you have a really shitty family, that is going to probably reinforce a lot of bad things. And I'm not saying this from the perspective of someone that does have a shitty family. My family's great. But I have seen throughout my life a lot of people, particularly LGBT people, they who have families that are repressive and downright abusive. And the kind of people who often get ignored in these sort of kids movies, whose situations are not accounted for, telling them shut up, what you think for yourself doesn't matter at all, listen to your family. I think that's incredibly harmful, especially when again, you have these family structures that can be very traditional, that can be very repressive, and can be very damaging. So I really bristle whenever I see a story, that goes all in on, family's number one, father, mother, grandma, grandpa, whoever knows best. Like, that is, something I take a lot of umbrage with. So I'm glad. Even if, it just seems like sensible, just seems like the middle way is like the correct thing to do in a movie. I'm glad that this movie went out of its way to not be like that. And I think one of the mechanisms that allows it to like sort of ride that line of like, yeah, you got to follow your dreams, but it's important to have your family, but that family should also support you and be good to you. I think the fact that De La Cruz ends up being such a bastard, like, actually really ends up helping with that, because, he's not the father figure in this. Hector is. And while, yes, with Hector we see that, he didn't do everything right, he, made some pretty big mistakes that have really, like, affected his family in a bad and profound way. But we see that, like, he was still trying his best. Like, he had regrets. And that, like, he kind of comes to an understanding, and Imelda, like, kind of comes to an understanding about music. And everything's all nice and happy at the end. And it can't really, it doesn't always work out that way in real life. But I think just the fact that the movie is able to present the dangers of either mindset well enough through both De La Cruz with the selfish ambition and the living grandma mostly for the like absolute like totalitarian like focus on the family. I think that the movie is able to reconcile those things. I think it's nuanced enough for like a child, like for a kid's movie. Like, it's a nuanced take that I think is important.
Yeah, it really does show that there isn't necessarily a clear choice. Your dream doesn't always pay out in the way that you expect it to. You watch De La Cruz fucking kill a dude, which, shows the dangers of just chasing your dream haphazardly. And it also has the grandmother who you immediately hate, especially if you're someone who is looking to do something more creative, where you're just like, no, I don't want to fall into this. And you dislike her because she is suppressing this individuality. And the fact that it has both sides very clearly represented and very definitively shown as neither being the correct answer is very good, especially for children to see, because there's not a correct answer to it. If you've got a shitty family situation, you might need to leave. If your dream isn't working out, head back to your family. They're going to help you out, potentially. Once again, you might have a shitty family situation.
Oh, I guess if neither is true, like, that's the true darkness.
Yeah, we apologize if that's the case.
As we say, this is a kid's movie. It's gotta offer some like hope or redemption. Like, it can't end with like Miguel like starving in the gutter because he didn't accomplish his dream and like his family didn't support him.
There is, however, a little bit of a darkness to the end of this movie. You were kind of pointing this out before we started recording, in that we do. De La Cruz gets his just desserts both in the afterlife and in reality. In the afterlife, he is exposed as a fraud and a murderer and cast aside once again to be crushed by a bell in a little ironic twist. And in real life, I'm not really entirely sure how De La Cruz gets ousted. I think it has something to do with the book that's found of the lyrics.
Yes, it's the letters. It's the letters that Coco has, and I think like they're just like presented to the news or something. But like, the truth gets out.
It's also not important. Like, all that matters is that it got out that he was a shitty person, which raises some interesting questions, because he's clearly going to be remembered for a long time as a musician, and I think there is almost an implication, at least within the universe, for younger, less attuned individuals, that he will be forgotten within reality as well as quickly. But as Jackson points out, and something that is kind of raised as a question to those of us who are watching this movie with an overly critical eye because we're weirdos, there's still a bunch of statues and stuff. And that's not to say that, these are going to be what preserves his memory, but now he has the twist of being a murderer, which has done a lot for a lot of people's careers, at least in terms of, like, remembrance. Like, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, some serious serial killers who are charismatic dudes, but not super famous. So now that we have this uber famous individual who just killed somebody, which adds so many layers of drama to it, I can see this individual being remembered for even longer just because of the situation that he arrives at. He won't experience this true death that's established within the movie.
Yeah, it's really horribly tragic that when you think about it, De La Cruz is still probably going to outlast every member of the family that we see. Like, poor old Grandma Coco is probably not going to last as long as De La Cruz, just because they're humble little family. Like, eventually, like, all those connections are gonna fizzle out. Whereas again, like, this boosted notoriety just makes De La Cruz go even longer. And it's just sort of it's a dark thing to come to a realization to, that just like, but it feels true that, like, you can have, like, a family member. Let's say you got, like, a really sweet, like, aunt who's, like, a really good person, and, like, maybe, like, volunteers in, like, the community, and, like, saves, like, like, rescues animals or something. Like, that person might still be forgotten, probably will still be forgotten, before someone like Jeffrey Dahmer is, or Charles Manson, or whoever the hell, just because, we got this, like, fascination with them. They become, like, famous, and that, like, even when it's bad.
Look at Attila the Hun or any of the other famous conquerors of the world. We still have a fantastic idea of who they were, what they did.
Yeah, and so even though it's wrong, like, that fame, the notoriety, like, still holds a kind of power even in death. And I think that it's not something that the movie addresses very specifically, but I think the movie is aware of this sort of wrinkle to it, just because we get the monument of De La Cruz. And I think if the movie wanted us to, like, emphasize that De La Cruz is going to be forgotten, it would have a scene of them, like, tearing down the monument, right? But we don't get that. Instead, they just modify it so that, like, they don't have the offerings in it, and they, like, graffiti, like, "forget you" on the sign, or whatever it is that it says. But the monument is still there, and, like, it's going to renew, like, this twist is going to renew interest. So I think that the filmmakers are aware of this sort of dark turn, and I think that the fact that they allow themselves to just, like, quietly let it sit there is just a really great detail.
Yeah, for sure. As I said, it was something that I hadn't really even thought about until you brought it up. But it's a very dark undercurrent to it that you don't really think about until you do, if that makes sense. And when you're aware of it, you just feel worse for everybody else, because this horrible, horrible person will live in the afterlife longer than anyone else will.
To get kind of away from the more specific, like, morbidity of, like, realizing the memory of Hitler is going to live the memory of yourself, like, I really like the mechanics of kind of the double death in this movie, because when it's first introduced, we get that, like, the scene of the guy they go and get the guitar from, and he's sort of glowing orange and is, like, coughing, and, like, we're clearly being shown the final death. For like a split second, I was worried, because it reminded me very much of Dragon Ball Z, which also has 2 layers of death. You get killed, and then you get sent to the afterlife. So far, so good. Then in the afterlife, if you get killed again by a pink bubblegum monster, then you disappear. And that's stupid. So I was worried that we were just going to have, like, a second death here to be, like, a really cheap source of drama for Hector. And this is also, again, before we really, like, see the full range of Hector's character. Because he's kind of played, before you know the full extent of what's going on, as kind of slimy, as, like, he's kind of like this no good sleazeball who's like trying to get past security and wants to go like live again for a day, but no one's got his picture up, so like how good could he really be? And so it just feels like another little another perhaps cheap source of drama at first. But then when they explain why this occurs, why there is this final death, it rings a lot more true. The memory aspect, the fact that the people in the afterlife aren't truly gone until they're totally forgotten. That is really interesting to me because the movie is dealing with such a specific cultural context for what death and the afterlife mean. And that's great. But you can kind of see how like they could have a version of that without that extra wrinkle to it. And that we're just going to kind of go on to an adventure in Dead Skeleton Land. And the fact that they have this extra layer with the fading from memory, like ties it directly back into like the plot of the movie and into the more like specific cultural elements. Like it makes the like the ofrenda and the offerings and making sure like this focus on like familial like remembrance, even if you never directly knew that ancestor, like that gives it all a lot more weight. But more importantly, like it's still even looking outside that cultural context of death, it still carries that weight in a way that by making that idea of the final death being forgotten by everyone who is left alive, by making that very literal through the text of the film, through the setting, I think that makes the sort of like emptiness of death really hit home. And so I think it's working in both ways. I think it strengthens like it both strengthens the cultural context of the film's sort of purpose, and it also brings in, it sort of relates it back to like other people who may not like see it in exactly that same sort of cultural context. It still brings in like that, speaking again as like as a pretty nihilistic person, who like speaking again only for myself, that I do believe that there is nothing after we die. Like tying it back in, just makes it such an interesting like combination of elements for me. And I don't know, the way the final death is handled is just really poignant and really great and really smart and subtle.
Yeah, it's the type of thing that hits you really hard and kind of sticks with you in a way that you're not prepared for. I was, not expecting to be taken aback and honestly too aware of my own mortality by this movie. I was, expecting that general, like, oh, we're all going to die type of thing to wash over me as a movie about death would. I was not expecting the social construct of I will be forgotten by everyone and everything at some point to hit me.
Not only will you be forgotten, but people, like, bad people will be remembered.
Yeah. It's really heavy for a children's movie, and it's not something that to be perfectly frank, I was not emotionally prepared for it. I was very much in the similar boat as Jackson in that I was pretty much expecting this to be a extra level of drama, a second ticking clock that existed just to imbue some hurry within the movie. I wasn't expecting a genuinely legitimate reason for why it would exist, and one that feels so natural within the universe. It really works on such a different level, and it works as a very good constant reminder of death. Like this whole movie, it is obviously about death, but for a children's movie, you would expect it to be kind of like, hey, we're in the city of the dead, and then have a whole adventure that kind of forgets about that. it lives in this theme of death. It lives in this theme of you will be gone, you will be forgotten, everyone will be. And it's horrifying and really interesting because it is a children's movie that doesn't just have this theme of death, but embraces and bathes in it. It keeps you constantly reminded, from the constant threat of ultimate true death to the slow skelefication of Miguel as you watch him in quick snippets where you see his ankle and suddenly that's a skeleton, as he stays far too long in this city of the dead. And it's just wild how much emphasis they put on death in this movie. I was legitimately expecting a movie about death, but I wasn't expecting a movie about death, is I think the best way of putting it. Like, I knew there would be death present, but not to the extent to which it was.
I think it's interesting to think about this conceptualization of death within the context of other Pixar movies. Because a lot of Pixar movies will have a concept like this. Will take this thing, like a toy or an emotion or something, and then give it more like human features and like create basically this own little world. Like Toy Story makes you think about what happens when you turn your back and you're not home and the toys like come to life, and it's a cute little idea and it's very literal. Inside Out, again, it's not really super thematic. It's just kind of maybe fun to think about. Oh, like who's in the captain's chair in my brain? Like, is anger the primary emotion? Like, oh, haha. Like you can kind of think about it in real life, but you're not really like thinking about it. Whereas with this movie, again, I can very easily see how they could have made this to be like an Inside Out. Like, oh, like I wonder what my little like skeleton house would look like. Like, oh, I'd love to after death like go to this kooky like death thing. But by having this extra layer, you're not thinking about that. When you're applying the movie's concepts to real life, you're thinking again about like, oh, how long am I going to be remembered? Like, who do I still remember? Like, am I making enough of an impact on, like, the people in my life? And it's all, and it's still through the context of, like, it's emotional. Like, I was still crying at the end of the movie, but through most of it, like, I was smiling. There's still goofy skeleton fun. There's still lots of pretty colors, lots of fun, like, set pieces. There's a wacky dog that runs around. So the context of this kid's movie, the fact that it's able to make me think about all this stuff without, like, making me not want to get out of bed is, like, an achievement.
It's stunning how much it really does, because it does introduce so many emotions and so many feelings surrounding death, but plays it off in such a way that, it didn't feel like I was watching a dour movie. I left in a very, as you said, I cried, but it was a very happy crying. It never felt like I was mourning for anything, just happy for the chance to exist. And I honestly, that's probably a big part of this movie. I don't have any specific citable examples that I can give you, but I guarantee that a huge part of this movie is just to be happy that you are here, happy that you have this time and to make the most of it, to impact as many people as you can and try and be remembered by as many as you can through your actions, and preferably good ones.
Oh no.
So now, to dash that little bit of hope and humanity I just introduced, I'm going to present to you my very dark and dour theory on how this movie is paced and presented.
We here at Beating a Dead Horse, we don't like to end on the hope spot. We like to end on the real shit.
Right. If you want hopeful, go listen to our Wonder Woman episode. I think that's the only episode we have ever ended on anything sort of positive. I think in general we're very, very dour. But there is a structure to this movie that I think resonates on 3 levels. And I'm going to try and do my best to explain how I perceive this. So the movie essentially presents the idea that you live one lifetime as a human, and from there you are remembered by approximately 2 to 4 generations following that. Those are the people who are going to remember you. So you would live about 2 to 4 lifetimes as a skeleton before you are forgotten and cast out to the ether. That nothingness that we have to face in our own lives, our own reality, that there might not be anything after there. And like that's even addressed within the movie of where do we go when that happens? We don't know. So we're shown that this ultimate end is ambiguity and loss and confusion. So you now have this idea on how the life cycle is presented within the movie. Additionally, we get about 20% of this movie in reality. It's based in actuality in the world that we know. The 80% that follows is set in this second life, this life after death, this city of the dead. And then it ends. And it does kind of bring it back to reality for a little bit where it kind of blends a little bit. But I think that's more just to reinforce the children's movie element of it, because I think what they're really going for is this movie as an analogy to human life. Because if you put those ratios into reality, our reality, not the reality of the movie, they line up very well with something. So as a reminder, it's 20% approximately, 60 to 80% in the middle, and then ambiguity as to what happens after. If you want to put that into more human terms, that's about, depending on your average lifespan, 15 to 20 years as a child, 20 to 100 or 80, 100, however long your average lifespan of your family might be as an adult, and then pure ambiguity. I think this movie was really kind of designed, at least in how it was structured, as a metaphor for life. Because there is a clear correlation between a majority of your time being spent in the city of the dead and the ambiguity that comes after. It rings very true for those of us who are above the age of childhood, because I remember watching this and being like, oh my God, that hit me really, really hard. I am at this point in my life the skeletons of the city of the dead. I am an adult. I am waiting for my ultimate ambiguity, the tail end of my story. I have already passed my reality of grandparents and Coco and my happiness of youth. I am now aware of my own mortality. I am cognizant of my ambiguous end. And I think that this movie does a very interesting job of telling that, of presenting that information through its structure, not necessarily through its story. And it's dark and it's underlying, but I definitely think it's there.
And I think the last piece of that little puzzle is the Dia de los Muertos itself, this idea of going back to your roots and going back to visit. And, it only happens one day out of the year, so it's not happening all the time. You can't just cross back into your childhood whenever you want. And really, you can only do it, if there are certain qualifications, certain people still in your life, certain places you can still go. And, every once in a while you're allowed to, go back and remember, but you can't ever really be part of it again. You're coming back in as an observer. You're maybe getting a meal from, your children or your parents or whoever's, still around. But in the end, you have to leave home, you have to leave childhood behind, you have to go back into, the real world of death in this movie.
And if your parents aren't around, if you don't have that location you can go, if your picture isn't posted, to put it in the terms of the movie, you can't return. There's just no way to make it back home. It is I think a very clear correlation that exists within the movie that is just kind of quietly there, and it's not until you really think about it that you see what they were doing in that regard.
There are a lot of things in this movie that are just kind of quietly there, and that's what makes it so great.
Yeah, it is. As I said, like, this is how you know it's a good Pixar movie, is because there's a lot of elements to it that are not explicitly stated that kind of exist for adults as well as children. There is clearly a children's movie base to this, but there's a lot of adult themes and thematic pacing and everything to it that really elevate it from Cars 3 to something that we're going to remember for a couple years down the road. Now that we have sufficiently depressed anyone who might have seen this movie and is now aware that it is a metaphor for their own life, we're going to wrap it up. If you've enjoyed what we've been saying, you can find more of us across the internet. I'm available on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. You can also find me on Twitch. I stream every Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday at twitch.tv/helpless_Skippy. I promise I am a lot more positive on both of those media.
And you can find me over on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller, where I will be giving myself a pat on the back for not interrupting Sean's analysis when he used the word Second Life to make a stupid joke about Second Life the game. I tried really hard to not say anything.
My God. Oh, I'm almost a little upset that you didn't. Oh. Oh, no, you deserve a pat on the back for that one. You deserve like a fucking round of applause. I would not have had the self-control to not do that.
So, go to Twitter to see that and other things.
Oh, Jesus Christ. If you want more news on the podcast, if you want to get our little snippets from our episodes, you can follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. As always, we'd like to thank Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a great band. You can find them on Spotify, or you can buy their albums, which I highly recommend. Next week, because we're starting to get into that holiday spirit and we're clever and everything, we're going to watch Die Hard.
Aha! Because Die Hard is a Christmas film, you see. We are the first to make that observation.
As two people who have never seen Die Hard.
Yeah, we haven't actually, neither of us have, which I was surprised to learn, and hopefully it'll be a good time, so stick around for that.
Until then, though, we are going to leave you with the saddest part of Coco, and the part that we really think resonates with the tone of the movie and how it portrays its themes.
We'll go and find the best tradition on and Elsa have ever seen.
No! Fuck you! It's not even a funny joke. We're not doing that. Roll the end music.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go